Tim, a 24-year-old with an unremarkable office job, feels a sense of dissatisfaction in his life. On his way home from work, he regularly passes by a park where elderly people sit alone on benches. One day, as he observes an elderly woman sitting alone for hours, a thought occurs to him. These people have lived full lives, yet now many seem isolated. The idea plants a seed in Tim's mind. He wonders if there is something he could do to help. That evening, Tim visits his grandmother, who lives in a quiet, modest home. During their conversation, she talks about how lonely she's been since her friends passed away and how the days feel long with no one to talk to. This resonates deeply with Tim. He asks her what makes her feel less lonely, and she replies that it's simply having someone to talk to and share memories with. Her words echo in Tim's mind long after he leaves. Lying in bed that night, Tim reflects on his grandmother's words and the loneliness he sees in the elderly around him. He wonders how many people are out there feeling the same way, with no one to talk to. Tim thinks back to his own life, so often distracted by technology and work, missing the value of human connection. This realization spurs him to act. He decides to start a program to provide companionship for the elderly. The next morning, Tim wakes up determined. He spends hours researching how to start a community program and considers what resources he might need. However, as the reality of the work ahead sets in, doubt creeps in. He has no experience with starting programs, no connections, and only a vague idea of how to move forward. Frustrated, he considers abandoning the idea. But the image of the lonely elderly people in the park stays with him, pushing him forward. After gathering his thoughts, Tim decides to take small steps. He starts by creating flyers for a new program he's calling the Elder Companion. The program is aimed at connecting volunteers with elderly people who need companionship or help with daily tasks. Tim prints the flyers and begins posting them in local shops, community centers, and libraries. His heart pounds as he leaves each one, unsure if anyone will even notice them. Days pass, and Tim hears nothing in response to his flyers. The silence feels deafening, and he starts to doubt himself again. Maybe no one is interested, he thinks. Maybe the elderly don't want strangers coming into their lives. As the week goes on, Tim's enthusiasm fades, and he begins to question whether his idea was worth pursuing. Just as Tim is about to give up, his phone rings. It's an elderly man named Mr. Collins, who saw Tim's flyer at the local library. He explains that he lives alone and has trouble getting around these days. Mr. Collins says he doesn't have many visitors anymore and would be grateful for some company. Tim is thrilled but nervous. This is his first client, and he wants to make a good impression. Tim arrives at Mr. Collins' home, a modest apartment filled with books and photos of a life well lived. Mr. Collins is in his late 70s, with a slow, measured way of speaking. He's kind but a bit guarded at first, unsure of what to expect from this young man offering to help. Tim starts by simply listening to Mr. Collins' stories about his past. As they talk, the older man begins to open up, appreciating the chance to share his life with someone who cares. After spending a few hours with Mr. Collins, Tim feels a sense of accomplishment. Though their time together was simple, mostly talking and helping Mr. Collins organize his bookshelf, it feels meaningful. As the program expands, Tim faces new challenges. More elderly people are requesting help than there are volunteers available. Tim begins to feel the strain of managing the growing program while balancing his personal life. He works late into the night, answering emails, organizing volunteer schedules, and trying to keep up with the demand. The pressure is mounting, but Tim is determined to keep the program running smoothly. Some of the new volunteers begin to struggle with the emotional toll of working with the elderly. A few elderly participants have serious health issues, and the volunteers find it hard to cope with the sadness of seeing them decline. One volunteer, Lisa, confides in Tim that she's not sure she can continue, as she feels overwhelmed by the emotional weight of the work. Tim listens, offering her support and encouraging her to take a break if she needs it. Tim begins to doubt whether he's capable of managing such a large and emotionally demanding program. The weight of responsibility feels heavy on his shoulders, and he starts to wonder if he took on too much. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, Tim sits alone in his apartment, questioning whether he should continue the program at all. Just as Tim is considering giving up, he receives a call from Mr. Collins. The elderly man thanks Tim for everything he's done and shares how much the program has improved his life. He tells Tim that the program isn't just about helping the elderly, it's about building relationships and bridging the gap between generations. Mr. Collins' words give Tim the encouragement he needs to keep going, reminding him of the program's true purpose. Inspired by Mr. Collins' words, Tim decides to restructure the program. He reaches out to the volunteers, acknowledging the emotional challenges but emphasizing the importance of their work. Together, they come up with a plan to provide better support for both the volunteers and the elderly participants. This includes regular check-ins and group meetings where volunteers can share their experiences and support one another. With renewed energy, Tim implements new strategies to ensure the program's sustainability. He recruits more volunteers, reaching out to local high schools and colleges to get younger people involved. He also partners with local businesses to sponsor events for the elderly, providing them with more opportunities for social interaction. These new strategies help the program grow without overwhelming Tim or the volunteers. One day, Tim receives a special request from Mrs. Harper, the widow who loves gardening. She asks if Tim can help her organize a community garden for the elderly participants in the program. Tim loves the idea and begins working with Mrs. Harper to make it a reality. The garden becomes a central project for the program, offering the elderly a chance to connect with nature and each other while working on something meaningful. The community garden quickly becomes a symbol of the program's success. Elderly participants and volunteers come together to plant flowers, vegetables, and herbs, creating a beautiful space that everyone can enjoy. Tim watches with pride as the garden flourishes, knowing that this project has brought joy and purpose to so many people's lives. As the garden grows, Tim faces new challenges. One of the elderly participants, Mr. Jenkins, becomes ill and can no longer tend to his section of the garden. But Tim did not give up and continued the journey with the volunteers.
Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more fun songs as well as interesting and enjoyable stories.